Hey, I'm Hunter from SkillThrive, and in this video, you're going to learn how to design this feature section in Figma. Alright, so you can see the design here in Figma that we're going to be creating in today's tutorial. Now, before we get started, we need to go ahead and install a couple plugins that we're going to be using in this video. So to do that, you want to come up here to the top menu, come into plugins, and then down to manage plugins. And then we can come over here to browse all plugins. And the first one we're going to use is the Unsplash plugin. So once you search for that, go ahead and click on the install button. And once you have that installed, the next one we want to install is the Blobs plugin, which is the first one here in the list. And after that, we want to go ahead and install the Lorem Ipsum plugin, which is also the first one here once we search for Lorem. So once you have those two installed, let's jump back into our project. And let's go ahead and create a frame here so we can actually get started on our design. And to do that, I'm going to hit A on my keyboard to bring up the frame tool, and then I'm just going to drag over to the right. And let's go ahead and make sure that this is 1440 and that the height I'm going to set to 500 pixels. And then let's go ahead and just rename this. And the next thing we want to do before we start designing is setting up this column layout. Now, if you use something like Bootstrap or other CSS frameworks, there's a good chance that you're familiar with the idea of a column layout. Now, we're not going to be using a framework in this tutorial. We're actually going to be using CSS grid, which is something that comes out of the box with CSS, in order to create a 12-column grid like this. And then we're going to base our design off of this actual concept. So let's say, for instance, up here, this design that I already have. You can see that it starts on the second column and that it spans 5 columns. And we're going to be using that exact same information in the CSS once we start styling this for the web. So to go ahead and create this layout, we want to select the this section here, and then we want to come over to Layout Grid and click on this plus icon. By default, it's going to actually create a grid, but we want to set a column, and we want the count to be 12. You can change the color if you want, but I'm just going to keep it on default. The type is going to be stretch the margin. So the margin on the left and right is going to be 140, and the gutter, or the spacing in between each column, is going to be 40 pixels. And like I said, we're going to be literally taking this and applying it to our code. So we're going to be creating 12 columns, and each column is going to have a size of 40 pixels in between each one. And the max width of all 12 columns is going to be 1,160 pixels. So that's why we're setting it to these values. All right, so now that we have this column set, I do want to mention that you could save this as a style. So if I come into this layout grid section again, click here and then click on this plus, I can go ahead and name this. So we can do something like 12 grid. And then I like to do a slash and then how big the artboard is. So this would be 1440. And then pixels. Now, I could click create style to create that, but I actually already have it saved here. So you see, by naming it the 12 grid with a slash, it's going to group it like this under 12 grid. And then I can see that this is a 12 grid with 1440p. Or not 1440p, but 1440 pixels. So what I'm going to do is actually just go ahead and click on this, which is the style that you would have created if you would have clicked on create style. All right, so now our artboard's ready to go and ready to actually start kicking off the design. And to start, let's go ahead and just focus on this text area. So I'm just going to hit T on my keyboard and then actually just click. And that's just going to create a simple text layer here. And what we can do is just type this out as awesome new feature. And obviously this text is too small. So let's go ahead and select it. We want to come over to Laura, and I'm going to set this to Roboto. And out of the box, Figma is going to come with Google Fonts pre-installed, so there's no need to install these on your local computer if you don't have them. So that's a really cool feature about Figma as well. So it's going to be Roboto. We're going to have bold, and the size is going to be 36 pixels. And the color is going to be the following hex code. So it's going to be 49485. It's just this like off black. Now, just like the grid, we can actually add this to our color styles as well by clicking on this icon and clicking on the plus. Then similar to this, I like to call it something like dark, followed by like, if this is my darkest one, I'd give this a value of 1. And then I'd go ahead and click on create style. Now, like before, I already have this in my color styles, which is right here. So you can see I have that now associated with dark 001. Now, why does this matter? Well, let's say, for instance, you had like 40 different designs here in your project as it grew, and you had a lot of things associated with this color, and you wanted to just tweak it a little bit. So what you could do is come over here and just tweak this value for dark 001. And I'm just going to make this drastic so you can really see it. You'll see that this up here also changed because it's associated with that color. So instead of going in and changing each time you wanted to use it, you just change it once in your color styles, and then it will be reflected in your design. Now, I don't want that color, so let's revert back to the original hex code. And let's go ahead now and make sure that this is aligned to the second column. And let's go ahead and span this 5 across. All right, so now that we have that, the next thing we want to do is go ahead and create a text section. So let's go ahead and hit T on our keyboard. Instead of clicking, I want to click and drag. So I'm going to click on this and then drag it over to 5 columns. And now what we want to do is we want to change the font family to Laura. Want to change the weight to regular and the size to 18. And then on the color fill here, I want to set this to dark 2. So let's go ahead and just show you what that hex code is, which is right here. So make sure you copy that when creating your styles. And now with this selected, we're going to be using the Lorem Ipsum plugin. Now, if I came in and tried to use this now, it would tell me that I don't have a text box selected. So like a quick workaround is just to hit the spacebar once, and for whatever reason, it's going to work now. So if we come in and come to plugins and then Lorem Ipsum, you can see that we can click on auto generate, and it's going to fill that text area with some just filler text. Now I'm actually going to resize this a little bit to like something like 105, and then run the plugin again. And then maybe just resize that just a little bit. All right, so now let's go ahead and move this 20 pixels down from the header. So what I'm doing here is I'm holding Alt or Option on the computer, and with the layer selected that I want to see how far away it is from something else, I just hold Alt or Option and then hover over the area that I want to find the distance from. So that's going to be the header, and you can see here that's 20 pixels. All right, so now we just have one more thing here to do in the text section, and that is the call to action link. So I'm going to hit T on my keyboard and just click once, and it's going to have the same settings from the one that we just did, but we want to change it to bold. And I want to change the color here to this accent, and then we can start typing. So I want to do explore new feature. And I forgot to mention the accent color is this following hex code. So once you have that, let's go ahead and come back. And again, let's make sure that this is on the left side of the grid and that it spans 5. So it's going to just span this over. And this is going to be 20 pixels as well. So it looks like I nailed that without even trying. And then what we can do is just go ahead and select all 3 of these layers, Command G, and just call this something like feature text. And with this group selected, I can come over here and click on this icon to center it vertically onto my artboard. And now you can see that it is nice and center. All right, so now that we have that, the next thing we want to do is create a blob. And you guessed it, we're going to be using the blob plugins to do that. So let's come into blobs. In this plugin, it's really simple. There's 2 things we can enter. And the values that we can enter here are from 1 to 10. Now, I like to think of complexity as like the number of curves. So something with lower complexity is going to look more round, and something with higher complexity is going to have more like curves on it. Now, contrast is going to be associated with like how big the variance is from the smallest and the smallest and highest points of your curve. So something with a high number is going to look more pointy, and something with a lower contrast is going to look more round. So let's try something here like 3 and then 5, and then click on Make Blob. And you can see, if you're not happy with that, you can try something like, let's do 3 and 6. So I'm digging this one a little bit more, but go ahead and play around with this and just kind of, see the blob that you want. And then once you have it, go ahead and just, can edit this, because this all it is a shape layer. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to change the color. You just come in here and change the color. Let's say you wanted to like scale this down like this. We could rotate it. So come to this edge until you get this icon and just rotate it. Then scale this down. Now, if we were to add an image to this right now, the image is going to be rotated as well. So let's go ahead and just use the Unsplash plugin to show you that. And let's do something like nature. You can see that this is rotated, which is not what we want. And the way to fix that is, with this layer selected, come over and click on Flatten. Now, in other programs, flattening a vector or a shape layer means that it's going to turn it into a raster image or a raster object, but that's not the case here with Figma. This is still going to be a shape layer. And that's just something really important to point out here. Now, once we add this to a picture from Unsplash, so let's come back into Unsplash. This time I'm going to search for a keyword like tech, in order to get that red image up here, and I think it's this one right here. So now you'll see that it's right side up, even though we rotated the original blob. And what we need to do too is make sure that this vector, I'm just going to go ahead and rename this to blob, is in our frame here. So you can see that it's outside the frame. So let's go ahead and drag this here onto our feature section 2. And I'm actually going to hide this really quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a container for this. And this is important because it just signifies that this is going to be in its own section here in the code. And I want it to span 5 columns. So I'm just going to hit R on my keyboard to create a rectangle. I'm going to span this 5. And then let's make it like 400 pixels tall. And then I'm just going to center this here onto our artboard. And the color here doesn't matter because we're going to hide it. And let's go ahead and just rename this rectangle to container. Move it under the blob, turn the blob back on. And let's go ahead and resize the blob so it fits a little better in this. And with the blob selected in the container, I'm going to actually go ahead and just group this and call it blob. And let's go ahead and center this blob onto the container. And then when that is centered, let's go ahead and just turn off the visibility of the container. So now once we select this blob grouping, you can see that this area is going to span 5, which is what we're going to be carrying over to our code as well. And it's also just going to make this easier to visualize how we're going to write it. So that's basically everything for the design. There is a couple things here that I need to mention really quick. The first one here is just setting the background color of this feature section. Right now it's set to pure white, so I'm going to set it to this light 1 color, which you can see here is just the following hex code. So it's just a little bit of an off-white. And the next thing we need to do is export the blob. Now don't export the blob section, export the actual blob. And to do that, you want to select the blob, come over here and you'll click here to export the image. And we actually want to export this as an SVG. And then click on here to export the blob, and then just save it where you want in on your computer. You can see here that I already have a blob saved, so I'm not going to save this one. And I'm actually going to be using this one in our design. So with that said, let's actually jump into Visual Studio Code and start writing the HTML for our project.